What up, Coordination? How's it going? On the pod today, we are talking about Protocol Guild 1 year in with Tim Beiko and Cheeky-Gorilla. So if you listen to GreenPill since the start, which you should, GreenPill episode 10 was with Trent Van Epps, and we talked about the Protocol Guild. And this is our follow-up episode a year later to talk about how it's going. The Protocol Guild is a guild of protocol developers in the Web3 ecosystem that receives token rewards from different things built on the Web3 ecosystem. So basically, it's a way of allocating rewards to protocol developers that are working on the Ethereum layer 1 and the protocol that is the consensus and execution layer within the Ethereum ecosystem. And so basically the idea is to align incentives so that protocol developers can work on the public good that is the Ethereum network and the Ethereum protocol, and to align incentives so that people can work on that. And on the pod, we have Tim Beiko, who is leading all core devs and is, organizing all core devs and is a member of the Protocol Guild. And we have Cheeky-Gorilla, who is an anon that is a Protocol Guild contributor. On this pod, we talk about Protocol Guild. We talk about the design of V1 of Protocol Guild. We talk about the V2 that's going live very soon. We talk about the 1 year pilot updates. They've raised $10 million is the headline and have hundreds of contributors on there. And we talk about how you, anon, can get involved in Protocol Guild and funding the Ethereum public good that is the protocol development in the network. So a really great episode of a project for funding public goods that has reached scale, and Protocol Guild is just super cool. So Coordination, if you care about funding public goods, this episode is for you. Without further ado, I give you Tim Beiko and Cheeky-Gorilla. Enjoy.
HAIRDAO is here to route around the middlemen in biomedical research for hair loss. HAIRDAO is an open source investment and operating organization using the coordination tools of Ethereum to begin exploring the frontier of biomedical research that bureaucracy and middlemen have previously prevented. Did you know that 66% of men and 50% of women will experience hair loss in their lifetimes? HAIRDAO has already done some crazy cool science stuff, like their first research study on the impact of synthetic T3 and T4 thyroid hormones on the human scalp, and is also the second DAO ever to mint an IP NFT. So if you want to explore the frontier of the decentralized science movement, and maybe also you've lost your hair along the way, check out HAIRDAO at hairdao.xyz.
What's up, gentlemen? Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having us.
Happy to be here.
Excited to talk about Protocol Guild. So we did an episode 10 of the GreenPilled podcast about a year ago about Protocol Guild. We'll have a link to that one in the show notes. But I'm wondering if Cheeky-Gorilla, if you could kick us off by answering the question, what is Protocol Guild?
Yeah, I mean, I guess at the highest possible level, it's essentially a public goods funding mechanism that's specifically designed to support Ethereum's core protocol work. That's an important thing because today, I guess, most of the funding comes from just a handful of sources, and the financial incentives are not quite up to what we think these individuals could get elsewhere or necessarily deserve. And so that's why the Protocol Guild essentially was created, to serve as a funding mechanism, right? That can be used by Ethereum's community, by its ecosystem, to fund core protocol work and, really create strong incentives to retain these contributors over the long term as well.
Thanks, Tim. Anything to add there?
No, yeah, I think that makes total sense.
Cool. So as I understand it, it sort of solves the incentive alignment issue where if you're a protocol developer working on the Ethereum protocol, you could probably make like double or triple the money by starting an alt layer 1 or going to work for an L2 or something. So it kind of creates a financial incentive pool to keep people working on protocols. Is that a fair take?
Yeah, and I think maybe this is your numbers might be off by an order of magnitude, right? So I think what you see in practice is, you might be able to make 20, 30x the salary if you went and started your own L1. And the way I think about it is like risk-adjusted reward, right? Like obviously if you go and you start a company from scratch, that's, a riskier thing to do than, working on the client team as an engineer. But even given that like amount of risk, for example, say you went to work on like an L2, then like maybe you potentially have, twice the risk, give or take, but like 5, 10x the potential upside. And so this kind of curve of like incentives is very skewed. And in the long run, if everybody sort of migrates from protocol work to other things that are just like, a better payoff for them in like expected value, then there's no one who maintains the protocol. And this is bad. It's bad for Ethereum, obviously, but it's also bad for all these projects that are built on Ethereum because it's like their most critical dependency, like the thing from which they get security and, liquidity and all of that stops being maintained. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the thing that I'd add there is that, we can't blame these people for being tempted by those kind of financial incentives, right? I mean, at the end of the day, people are allowed to be, rational. They're allowed to support for their family and that kind of stuff. And so I guess the Protocol Guild is all about basically, creating a way to realign those financial incentives in a way that does support the core protocol.
Yeah. One of the values or the sort of the themes that we explore a lot on this podcast is how can we align our values with our monetary incentives. So like what I'm hearing here is that we all love Ethereum, the network state that is Ethereum, and its public good depends on the security of the network, which depends on validators, of course, but the people who are building the protocol, of which, by the way, there's multiple consensus layer and execution layer teams. So there's many people working on the protocol, could make way more money if they defect and they go work at an alt layer one or something that's a little bit more privatized. And so this is like aligning the incentives so that people can pay their mortgage, send their kids through school, but still work on the protocol. So it's aligning the values of these people with the money. And that might be a broad oversweeping statement because not everyone has the same values. But I think that one of the parts of the Ethereum culture is the public good, the security of the Ethereum network. So is that a fair take?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, you mentioned validators in passing. Like when we designed, the reward schemes for validators, even though there can be altruistic validators, you don't want the security of the network to depend on that assumption, right? Like that validators are going to do it altruistically. And I think that, you see something like that as well with the maintainers. Like, today, I'd say most maintainers of Ethereum like have a very large altruistic component in the work that they do, which is great. But it's also not something from like a mechanism design point of view that you want to like lean on too heavily, right? If it gets you, your last 10% of like coordination or something like that, that's great. If like the entire thing is relying on people's goodwill, then it's easy to see many cases in which that would break down, and especially in the long term as the community grows and things just kind of dilute a bit more.
Right. Well, I'd love to talk about the design of Protocol Guild. I think we touched on it a little bit in the episode with Trent a year ago, but could we revisit the design criteria behind the mechanism and what are the most unique and exciting parts of the Protocol Guild design that you want to call out? Maybe I'll start with you, Tim.
Yeah, maybe we're actually in the process of like changing your entire architecture, and Cheeky's been like leading that, so I can kind of walk you through how it is today. And, sort of the pros and cons of that approach. And then Cheeky can kind of walk you through what we're calling Protocol Guild 2.0. So high level, you can think of Protocol Guild as like a router for funds. So there's effectively two major contracts. The first is a vesting contract from 0x splits. And this is just a vanilla vesting contract, which has, in our case, effectively zero governance parameters once it's deployed. So our current vesting contract is a 1 year duration. The next one will be 4 years. But when people send funds to that, there's no way that they can be sort of clawed back either by the sender or by Protocol Guild itself, right? There's no like governance where we could just, take all the funds, make them vest quicker, anything like that. And you can send any ERC20 token or ETH, doesn't take NFTs for now. Once those funds have vested, they go to a split contract. The idea with a split contract is that everyone on the contract has the right to a share of like the assets in the contract. And this is really the main, you can think of product that Protocol Guild does, is we as a collective curate the list of who should be on that split contract and what weight they should have. And so right now there's, I believe, 128 people on this split. And these are people from, like you mentioned, these 10 different client teams, some research teams, some DevOps teams, a couple random coordination people like me or Trent. And so, Protocol Guild basically is us coming to consensus on like norms to add and remove people from this list. And it's nothing, it's not rocket science. Effectively, people have to work on Ethereum L1. They have to have done so for like, at least 6 months, so we can know that they're actually, like going to stick around and don't just update the list for nothing. And then, they're nominated by their peers. And as long as there's no strong objections, they typically get added. And one kind of noteworthy thing with this as well is that Protocol Guild is a mechanism designed around like the people. So all of the people on the split are there independently of their affiliation. Like obviously there's people from the EF, there's people from Consensus, there's people from Prism, from Lighthouse, but the funds go directly to the individual. So imagine, there's like 20 people working on Nethermind, but only 10 of them are working on like ETH-L1. Those 10s would be eligible, not the others. And similarly, if those 10, quit their job at Nethermind and kept working on the protocol, they'd still be part of Protocol Guild. So this is like another really powerful thing where, the funds literally go to the people. And so yeah, TLDR, vesting contract, sends it to a split. Split is curated by the guild itself, and that's kind of the entire product. And one way I'd like to think about it is, you can think of it as like an API to donate to public goods. So we've seen a lot of like projects want to like reward, when they do airdrops and stuff like that, like how do we reward, core devs, maintainers of Ethereum and whatnot. Some of them have come up like really complicated schemes. We're going to analyze all the repos, count the commits and whatnot. Protocol Guild is literally just like an ETH address. You plug it in, you can send some money there and have like confidence that, it, not only will it be an accurate view today, but like when it finishes vesting in 4 years, the guild will still be kind of maintaining that membership. So high level, this is how it works today. Maybe Cheeky, you can walk us through like what are some of the issues with that, and like what are we trying to do next?
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah. I was going to say, Tim, I wonder if this is too reductionist of a take, but it almost reminds me of like a 4-year option grant from when I used to work in startups. Like I vest out every month. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is literally, I think the thing the sort of mental model I have for this in like the long run is, imagine you get like a 4-year option grant, but it's like an S&P 500 tracker for like all the projects built on Ethereum, right? Where, these people obviously are not going to work for Gitcoin or Optimism or whatnot, but you can imagine like if each of those projects, contributed to Protocol Guild, then, you're sort of offering this like basket of tokens that are built on Ethereum, and you provide like upside in the ecosystem that all the people building like the core layer. So yeah, that's effectively the similar model. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Cheeky, go ahead. I think you're about to say something.
Yeah, exactly. So essentially, what Tim just described there, that was all part of our 1-year pilot, right? And I think overall, the consensus is that we are very happy with our pilot, right? We think it was a success. Obviously, given the volume of donations, we received about like $10 million in funding, which is worth like $14 million today, from all sorts of different ecosystem tokens. I think only like maybe 20 or 25% of it was actually.
How many is that per contributor? It's like a little bit over 100K per contributor, if I'm doing the math correctly.
So the amount that's actually been distributed so far is like 9.5 million. And so it's around about 65K right now, or maybe 70K right now. And I mean, cool. Depending on where you live, that's either a year's salary or it's a good bonus. And, for the pilot, again, it was kind of limited in scope. But what we're seeing now is that we're happy with the results. So we want to expand this mechanism. And, one of the most important things to do there is obviously scale fundraising. But to scale fundraising, we will need some changes to our smart contract architecture, right? Because some of the mechanisms that Tim described were mainly handled via multi-sigs, and so we need to get rid of all those multi-sig dependencies. We need to make sure everything's as trustless as possible. And so, we're essentially taking the stack that we had before. We're taking the existing contracts made by the team at 0x Splits. Those vesting and distribution contracts, and we're pairing them with kind of 3 other modules, right? So as I said, the first module will be the to handle all the finances. It's going to be the vesting and distribution of vested funds. That's still via these 0x Splits contracts. The new component is we're going to implement a Moloch v3 DAO. Shout out to Deacon and the DAO House crew for helping us with this. Obviously, the DAO will be for governance decisions, things related to membership changes. And then the final module is this on-chain registry, right? This list of members, and that's, it's not actually part of the DAO. It will sit as kind of like in between. It'll sit as kind of middleware between the DAO and these vesting contracts. And so, very high level, the way it will work, as you would expect from a DAO, will contain all of the Protocol Guild's members, one person, one vote. A member will create a proposal to change the membership. That will go for an on-chain vote. Once that passes, it's executed. It will basically trigger a function to update this on-chain membership registry. Once that's done, then we will essentially be able to trigger a different function that can essentially feed that membership registry into the vesting contracts, such that the recipients are updated, so that the vested funds go to the current active membership and not the old one, right? And so with those three components, we basically think we'll be in a really good spot to essentially get rid of all the multi-sigs. We'll be in a place to basically have this on-chain governance mechanism. We touched a little bit on like the weighting mechanic that will all be on-chain. So there will be some gas costs with that, but we're still trying to iron those out. And then the last part of the mechanism, or the V2 mechanism, which we're still trying to figure out, but haven't finished analyzing all the trade-offs yet, is how to handle layer 2 donations. Again, today this has been handled via multi-sig. And so the question that we've kind of been grappling with so far is, do we aim to consolidate all donations from the layer 2s onto mainnet, right? There's some issues there with liquidity of layer 2 specific tokens. And the alternative would be that we essentially, deploy our vesting contracts on all the various layer 2 and EVM chains, and essentially let those donations live on those chains, right? And so, yeah, if anyone's listening to this that has any ideas, please reach out to us. We're open to suggestions. But yeah, I think with those different components that I just mentioned, we'll have a really robust smart contract architecture, which will, I guess, give us confidence in basically extending the vesting period from 1 year to 4 years, and then hitting that target, as Tim said, of raising $100 million over those 4 years.
Nice. I didn't even know about the $1 million or $100 million target. That'd be pretty sweet.
Yeah, and I think on that note, so the pilot, we mentioned earlier was 10 million. One thing I think is important is we want to scale this thing sort of gradually in a way, because figuring out the norms about who is eligible, who isn't, what's what's the right where the line is, and what are all the weird edge cases to work through. You want to do that with increasingly high stakes. So the pilot was kind of great because it forced us to think through things like, should somebody who's on a team that also has a token be part of Protocol Guild? Should somebody who's working on the DevOps part be in Protocol Guild, right? They're not writing code for the client, but they run the nodes. And then, where do you extend that? If the engineer is in Protocol Guild, and the DevOps person, should the recruiter who hired both of them be in Protocol Guild? And I think it's good to have those conversations when the stakes are real, but not insanely high. Or another example, I was concerned about before the pilot, is will people leave Protocol Guild, right? They're getting free money for this. Is there an incentive to pretend that you're still working on Ethereum? And we've actually seen a bunch of people leave over the past year. So that's quite healthy, right? That when people actually quit their job, they have signaled that they want it to be removed from Protocol Guild. And so, yeah, so I think, 10 million over a year, if you raise, 100-ish invested over 4 years, it's about 2.5 times the yearly amount. So it's it kind of raises the stakes, and allows us to, deal with whatever issues will come up, in terms of internal governance at that scale. And once we've resolved and aligned on those, then you can sort of keep scaling this way. And I think that's just generally a good approach. Gitcoin, you've all done this with all the rounds, right? Where you have to deal with different Sybil attacks every round, and you learn a little bit what went wrong, and then you can kind of raise the stakes next time. You see this with RPGF as well. So I think, yeah, I'm a big believer that you want to incrementally get this thing bigger and have precedent and just accumulated knowledge, before the stakes are too high.
Yeah. Iteration is a good solution in general to complex systems, I think is the way I would summarize that.
Yeah.
So any other updates on the 1 year pilot? Anything that you think was a success or a learning coming out of that?
A couple for me, just like off the top of my head. Cheeky wrote a full report, so he has like the all the details. But like one, like yeah, the fact that people voluntarily left is like kind of good to me, that like people like value the mechanism being healthy more than like keeping their share of the pie. One thing that's also come up, there's like the main thing is like it's come up in like more than a handful of times that people have like reconsidered their career choices based on like current and potential future protocol guild revenue. And obviously don't want to like get into people's private like situations, but like I've seen both people like choose not to move from like ETHL1 because of protocol guild. I've seen people wanting to come work on ETHL1, like interviewing people, and they're like, oh, if I get this job, will I be part of protocol guild at some point? And it's sort of like proactively learned about that. And like, yeah, and I think you've seen also like people who've like moved on to separate roles in the ecosystem kind of like think through, is it fair? Is it fair for them to still be there, or should they like leave the spot to other people? And not that there's a limited number of spots, but obviously it's like a fixed sum of money. So to me, like that's like basically the main goals we wanted to achieve is like, can we retain people? Can we attract people? And can we like gracefully offboard people in a way that like, they don't feel, it's not like an adversarial thing, or like, we have to like hunt the people who are no longer working on the protocol. So I'm super happy about that. Yeah, Cheeky, I don't know, from you?
Yeah, I mean, I'll riff on that one, like specifically with the membership changes, right? So, Kevin, when Trent was on the podcast with you a year ago, I think the membership had just hit 100 or something like this, right? And I mean, we had started with 90 members, and today on chain there's 128 members, off chain there's 131 members. We haven't gone through the updating the on chain stuff yet, and so we've added over 50 members, we've removed around 15 members, and I think this is a very powerful indication that this self-curation mechanism is working. And Tim touched on it before, but I think really this self-curation aspect of the protocol guild is really worth kind of drilling down on, because it's quite unique compared to different funding mechanisms out there. And from my perspective, the only reason why the protocol guild has legitimacy is because this list, right, this membership registry is accurate, right? And I feel like with all the changes that have gone through during the pilots to this membership registry, without any drama, without any scandals, we can look at this list and say, hey, this represents the current set of contributors quite well. And I think that's a big win for the protocol guild from like the pilot's perspective, that member curation seems to be working. It works well enough to the point where obviously we want to keep it for Protocol Guild V2. But yeah, that was really good to see that there wasn't really any strong disagreements on that point. So cool to see the membership, kind of plateau now where it is around the 130 level. And it'll be interesting to see over the next 4 years how it changes.
And maybe I was gonna say, I have one last thing that I think was cool is core devs tend to be very skeptical of what happens on Ethereum. Like they have like a very negative perception of like stuff like DeFi and whatnot in general, which is very funny. And so when we told them like we're gonna start Protocol Guild, there was definitely like a number of them who were just like skeptical of the whole thing. Not for any particular reason, but I think they just have like this like high skepticism of like anything moving tokens on Ethereum. And then I'd say, like, again, I'm not sure of the exact number, but like at least like a couple of them over the like year of the pilot, like we asked them to join, we asked all the contributors to join on day one. Like some of them just said no, and we didn't like force them to do it. But like we've seen a few people over the year that are like, okay, like now I think I get Protocol Guild, and like this thing is not a scam, and like it seems to make sense, and like I'd like to join it. So I think that was really cool as well. Like just seeing people who are like initially skeptical and, like have a very high bar for what they consider legitimate in terms of what gets built on Ethereum, sort of change their mind and end up joining. So yeah, that was neat.
Yeah, that is neat to see. It's kind of building cultural interop between the protocols built on Ethereum and the Ethereum protocol developers. Yeah. There's something beautiful about that. Go ahead, Cheeky. I think you're about to say something.
Yeah, I mean, talking about like the pilot results, right? It would be a shame not to talk more about the funding that we've received. So as I mentioned, it was $10 million, valued at $14 million today, and I mean that came from over 4,000 different donations, right? And so when I mentioned before about we've seen like buy-in from the ecosystem, it's because of that, right? Because of the volume of donations that we've seen. But I mean, one thing that is worth calling out is that a lot of that funding actually came from 5 governance grants from Lido, Uniswap, ENS, Nouns, and MolekDAO. And so, I mean, they essentially helped seed this pilot in its infancy when we had the 90 members when this was still very much highly experimental. So a big shout out to them. Thank you so much for seeding the pilot at that time.
Yeah, it's almost like a barbell, right? Like we have like these projects who like obviously contributed like a lot of funds, but then you also see this massive long tail of people wanting to contribute. And like both of those are great. Like sometimes, Trent tracks this like super closely and he'll send me, there's somebody who is like doing physical like wood frames for something, I forget. And they were like, I'll donate like 1% or 10% of the revenue to Protocol Guild. And this was just like some crypto enthusiast with like a random like business on the side and like wanting to donate to that. And then, there were like a couple like home stakers who like, donated part of their earnings to Protocol Guild. And so it's kind of really neat to see people like at a smaller scale as well, like contribute to this. And yeah, see like larger projects actually, put a meaningful chunk of their treasury towards maintaining the protocol.
Yeah, the wooden frame thing. Shout out to NAND Mountains. Yeah, they donated 20% of their revenue to the Protocol Guild. Shout out for doing it in a creative way.
So if I'm a listener and I'm working at a DAO or a Web3 project that's interested in contributing to Protocol Guild, how do I get in touch with you? And how do I build momentum within my DAO around doing it?
Yeah. So first I'll say like what's really neat is you don't even need to get in touch with us. And shout out to Arbitrum, right? Protocol Guild, it's just an ETH address. You can send tokens to it. So Arbitrum actually included us in their airdrop as the only non-Arbitrum DAO that they like sent tokens to. And they didn't ask, they were like, oh, we'll just send the money to Protocol Guild. So like step one is like, you literally don't have to reach out. You can just, go on the docs and take the address, send the tokens there. If you do want to, Trent, me, and Cheeky are all on Twitter. There's a Protocol Guild Twitter. We have a Discord as well. We can put, those links in the show notes. We're pretty responsive. Yeah, just ping us. And then in terms of like, how do you sell this within a DAO? I think if you want to take the most pragmatic point of view, like imagine you're not, aligned with like the vision of like public goods or like, like all of that. Think of it as just dependency funding. Like you're building your project on Ethereum and it's like a critical dependency for your stack. And, with like a relatively modest contribution, you can help make sure that this thing is funded and, bring security to your project. So I'd say this is like the most pragmatic argument. I do think that like, look, if you are trying to build something and kind of shape how we think like public goods should be funded, how we think coordination should happen in the ecosystem, like those are arguably more powerful reasons, to contribute to Protocol Guild. But, even if you don't believe any of that, then just from a purely pragmatic perspective, like think of this as like a core dependency in your stack that you can, if you're effectively launching a token, especially, you're kind of creating money out of thin air in a way, and you can like take this like, new money that you've created and literally magically send it to like protocol contributors, which is kind of wild when you think about it.
Yeah, I'll add 2 other reasons there to donate, I guess, if I can be so direct. Obviously the first one is just to kind of show that you are, you want to signal support of Ethereum's values, right? Because, the Protocol Guild directly inherits those values, but it's also probably worth clarifying real quick that, the Protocol Guild and Ethereum's development roadmap are 2 entirely different things, right? The Protocol Guild absolutely takes no responsibility for either the planning or the execution of Ethereum's roadmap, right? The Protocol Guild is a fundraising mechanism for the people who are doing that work, right? Nevertheless, we still support the same values of Ethereum, so donate as a signal of that support. And then the last reason I'll call out is Also, because I want to say this phrase, if I'm on the GreenPilled podcast, public goods are good, right? And the work that these members are doing is a public good, right? And so show your support for public goods by sending a donation to the Protocol Guild.
Nice. Just hearing you talk about the value proposition for Protocol Guild reminds me of this XKCD comic about dependencies in open source software.
Yes.
Do you know the comic I'm talking about?
Yes. Yeah. It's, there's like everything relying on this tiny bit that's underfunded and has two people maintaining it. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I can't share my screen, and so I'll have to just talk through it for the audio listeners. But it's a bunch of like building blocks, like imagine like kids blocks, and then they're all kind of like tilted against each other. And at the top it says all modern digital infrastructure, and they're all sort of like hinged on some random person maintaining an open source library. So I think it's just like this classic XKCD comic showing the dependencies and the underfunded, undermaintained, thankless work that open source software developers have. But in Web3, it's like 10 times more existential because it's not just the digital infrastructure that's relying on it. It's like your bags, like all your tokens, all your NFTs and everything, the security of everything relies on that one building block.
And I think it's even worse for another reason, that when you like launch a token on Ethereum, you sort of contribute to like the incentive misalignment. So it's almost like you're not only are you like making the pile like bigger on top of that thing, but you're maybe like chipping away at the little block as well, because of like, you've like now created this new sort of, thing they could go work on rather than the protocol. So basically Protocol Guild hopes to make this like tiny thing maintaining the whole pile, relatively proportional in size to the pile, so that Ethereum could be like a secure base layer for projects to depend on for like a very long time, right? Like obviously it's secure today, but it's like, there is like continued maintenance to assure that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I guess I'm wondering if you want to talk about any of the specific DAOs or the recent funding from Arbitrum and Optimism. I see that in our notes as something that we wanted to cover.
I can take it. I touched on Arbitrum a bit already, so I'll like expand on that, and we can maybe cover RPGF and Optimism and all of that after. But yeah, shout out to Arbitrum. I think, definitely the biggest like donation that we did not have to like explicitly, write a governance forum post for. So, them proactively contributing to this is amazing. And I think the thing that was even cooler is effectively in Arbitrum's airdrop, they airdropped to like all of the DAOs built on Arbitrum. And the only DAO that was not like an Arbitrum native DAO was Protocol Guild. And I forget how high it was in allocation, but it was like, within like the top 5 or 10 like largest DAO in comparison. So they sort of like treated Protocol Guild as, they treated one of the top projects in their ecosystem. So that was like, I think, a very like great thing for them to do. And I think sort of sets the stage where like, you don't have to ask us to do this. Like, obviously, we're happy to help. We're happy to talk about Protocol Guild all day with anyone who wants to hear about it. But you can just, take the ETH address and like send some tokens to it. And, that's great as well. So yeah, shout out to Arbitrum. Optimism as well. So Optimism has RPGF. I'm sure you've covered it extensively on this podcast. Your listeners are familiar with it. But they just ran a new round of RPGF, the third one. They had 10 million OP tokens to donate, and Protocol Guild was actually the single largest recipient from this. And the thing that's kind of neat with the RPGF round is Optimism has like these badge holders, so basically people in their community who vote on the projects. So it's not necessarily just like the OP Labs or Optimism Foundation that chose this. It's really like all the delegates and the other set of badge holders in the Optimism community who each make like an independent decision, and then I think they're like one person, one vote. So it's kind of wild to see that like, all of this aggregated over like about 100 voters, like led to Protocol Guild being the number one funded project. And the other thing that was interesting is I mentioned earlier that Protocol Guild, sends the money directly to the people rather than the companies. Obviously, you still need the companies to like support these people. So Optimism's RPGF round actually sent twice as more to client teams than to like Protocol Guild itself. I don't have the exact number in front of me, but like you can think of Protocol Guild as being the biggest recipients, and then like the 9-ish client teams being twice as big as that. So I think this was like a pretty massive, show from like the Optimism Collective that they truly like support this stuff and want to fund it and want to see it thrive. So yeah, shout out to them as well. Like I did not expect Protocol Guild to end up being the number one, and then for like all of the client teams aggregated to be even larger than that.
Yeah, it's cool. Well, I was an Optimism badge holder for RPGF round 2, and I voted for Protocol Guild. So I'm
Thank you.
Give it a shout out for sure.
Yeah.
Cheeky, anything to add about that?
No, I mean I could just echo what Tim said. We're incredibly grateful. Like Layer 2 season has officially begun for the Protocol Guild, and we're stoked.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm wondering what the post-pilot plans are. So what's the plan from here? I think we heard about the technical re-architecture, but so we know the technical re-architecture is coming with Moloch v3. The shot is for $100 million into Protocol Guild. Anything else to say about future plans?
Yeah, building the norms. And so, the Protocol Guild was at least in part inspired by a tweet from Danny Ryan back in October 2021. Where he said, and I'm paraphrasing here, sorry if I'm misquoting you, Danny, about making it a social norm to allocate a % of tokens to core protocol work, right? And obviously, the Protocol Guild represents the best instantiation of that. So we want to build that norm, right? If we want Protocol Guild as a funding mechanism to truly be sustainable over the long term, the way to get there is by really convincing Ethereum's ecosystem to basically, by default, donate 1% of their token, their revenue, their profit to the Protocol Guild, right? So we need to raise awareness about the Protocol Guild. There's a lot of marketing work that we have to do, but we're still early, and obviously, yeah, being on podcasts like this helps tremendously with that. So thank you for your part in that, Kevin.
And maybe I'll add one more thing to all of this. And Cheeky, you briefly mentioned this, it's, Genesis allocation for tokens is probably the easiest thing for a project to do. And, it really works well with Protocol Guild, how it's structured. But then, I think we've been talking with projects who, for whatever reason, don't fit that or, don't want to do that. But like, what are other ways that you can, contribute? And I think that's like some open area where like, if you have a funky idea for like, for example, I'll give a few some layer twos, have mentioned, it might make more sense for them to like send part of their sequencer fees to Protocol Guild, if say they don't want to have a governance token or something like that. Or shout out to Tetranode actually, who's been like a funding Protocol Guild like since I think the beginning. He literally puts like his yield farming money, part of it's back into Protocol Guild. So it's like, I think every week he sends us something like 10 ETH or something. And coming up with like funky mechanisms like that, that just kind of show people like what are different ways that work. And we had like this call with Eat Staker as well, where, if you run a validator, there's ways you can use a 0x split contract, and you could do something like send, 1% of the transaction fees you get to Protocol Guild, right? You just, create a splitter contract, you put your address at 99%, you put Protocol Guild at 1%, and it just all sort of happens on chain, and you don't have to think about it anymore. So like, yeah, things like that, I think is something that's like worth exploring. Like, what are different ways that just work with, basically, how do you make Protocol Guild the easiest API to just like be coupled to any like flow of funds in the ecosystem? Yeah, I think this is like the general question. And yeah, so interop is the thing I think we're focused on. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important. Like we want the protocol guild to be something that's, opt in, like not just for members, but also for donations, right? For the same reason, the Ethereum protocol is burning fees and not redirecting it to public goods. We want the protocol guild to be a mechanism that people can choose to donate to if they want to, right? And so, it's not probably a good idea to like shout out all the different funders that we have had, but a shout out to, for example, Anthony Sassano, who is committing all of his ODAO rewards from Rocket Pool to the Protocol Guild. And so, to echo what Tim said, there's like so many different ways that both Ethereum's ecosystem and its community can help fund the protocol that they either depend on or they love. And I mean, it's heartwarming to see every single donation that we get. And the more we build this meme, we're excited to see where it takes us.
Yeah. I wonder if you could paint me a picture of what Protocol Guild looks like in 10 years. So say I have you back in 2033 and I don't know, maybe we're on, Dank sharding is live and all of the things in the purge, the merge, the surge are live. What is the final resting state of this, or what does it look like 10 years in?
Yeah, I'd say my like optimistic base case, if you want to call it that, like not going to happen by default, but also doesn't seem insane, is like most of the good projects on Ethereum by default donate either 1% of their tokens or 1% of their fees or whatnot to the guild. This is to help build like some basket of tokens that represent the entire ecosystem. So one thing I'm particularly concerned about, and my day job is running the governance calls for Ethereum. I don't want like just Uniswap to fund the protocol guild and it becomes like the Uniswap bribing guild, right? Or just Lido, or or just layer twos, or just DeFi. So like I think it's like extremely important that there's like diversification. And I'm really happy with the pilot because we got like Lido, we got Moloch, we got Nouns, we got Uniswap, we got ENS. It feels like it's a good like representation of the ecosystem, and we were pretty mindful about like who we reached out to reach that. So yeah, end state, you have like basically a snapshot of like all the stuff that's built on Ethereum. Part of it, donated to Protocol Guild, vesting periodically, over like a 4-ish year time horizon. And one thing that's neat is like, like project starts, they're not worth a lot. Some of them end up being valuable. So like they make up, most of the treasury, and then those tokens vest out. And then, there's some new thing that comes along and kind of fills in that gap. And kind of replenishes the thing. And then I think, again, this is like what I said at the very beginning, but like the risk-adjusted rewards of working on like L1 like makes sense. And almost the way I think about this is like, imagine some mercenary comes and they want to work on Ethereum. Like they should almost be like agnostic between are they going to work on L1 or something else, on a risk-adjusted basis. So it's like a very hard hypothetical to like, if you think of an actual person, because people tend to have strong preferences of what they want to do, but like the rational observer should like look at Ethereum L1 work versus anything else and feel that it's like, yeah, well compensated on a risk-adjusted basis. Yeah, and I actually, and one more thing I'll say, I don't know if this is an end state, but it's like something I care deeply about as well is that it stays focused on individuals, right? Like I think like incentives can really shift in this space, and not that like any of the teams right now are at risk of that, but there is like some value where imagine, I don't know, you worked, I'll take the EF as an example because I worked there, but like the EF turns evil tomorrow, right? Like for whatever reason. If I have Protocol Guild, I might be able to make a choice between like, do I want to stay at the EF and work on, evil EF, or do I want to just, quit my job and work on like Ethereum, the protocol, and, potentially not be as affiliated with like a company or org. And I think that is like really powerful. If you think, imagine, 10, 20 years from now, the maintainers aren't just like a bunch of blockchain companies, but it's like, think of like the like Linux maintainers, right? It's this vast set of people, bunch of random interests. Like Protocol Guild is like the thing that's like advocating for Ethereum's interests. And again, a lot of the times they're aligned with companies, but in the case that they're not, making it easier for people to literally quit their job and just keep working on Ethereum is like a super valuable property. So yeah, that's something I think is important.
Yeah. Well, if you hit your goal of $100 million in funding over the next couple of years, just doing the math at the current number of contributors, that's like 600K
Yeah.
per contributor. I mean, of course, that's a reductionist example because there's going to be more contributors over time. But you all might also exceed your fundraising targets of 100 million.
Yeah.
So it's just a guess.
Yeah. That doesn't seem insane. Like, I mean, and for, it's 600K in like tokens, right? Not in like fiat. And that's not like far from like what an engineer at like some DeFi or L2 or like startup would get. So yeah, I think it's like trying to bring it like somewhat in line in terms of like the compensation package that like the industries can offer, and especially in terms of tokens. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Tim covered sort of the dream end state for Protocol Guild pretty well from like a holistic perspective. I think for me, more anecdotally, like coming from my perspective, which is like I am not a core dev, right? I am not a gigabrain. I am simply like a volunteer to the Protocol Guild. I am a full-time contributor, and as of right now, it really does take up my full time. And the way I see it, if Protocol Guild V2, if the new mechanism that we have, if the memes that we build are so effective to the point where someone like me doesn't need to contribute full time to this, or if I can go contribute to something like Ethereum cat herders instead, then I will be very happy with the work that we've done. But then, obviously, as Tim said, there are bigger goals than that, with becoming like a counterbalance or funder of last resort for all of Ethereum's core protocol work.
Yeah. One of the ideas that came up while we were at a meetup recently together, and I know that one of the ideas that we discussed is people forking Protocol Guild and using it for their own ecosystem's public goods. So say I'm in like a DAO and I want to make sure that contributors to the DAO are long-term aligned and working for the DAO. And so like in companies, we have a 4-year stock option plan where you get not only your base salary and your benefits, but you also earn a portion of the company over time. What would you say to anyone who'd be interested in forking Protocol Guild, either the pilot version or the new version, and creating like a stock option plan for their DAO or for their organization? Is that a friendly fork to you, and is that something that y'all would be open to?
Oh yeah. Like and first of all, it's like it's all permissionless. Even if I dislike the idea, can't stop you from doing it. But like, and one thing I'll say is we've thought about this like with funders, right? Like how big should the Protocol Guild be, right? Like should it just be ETH1 maintainers? But that's not all that's needed for Ethereum to thrive and succeed. There's dev tools, there's a bunch of things. But when we were talking with like projects to fund this, I think specificity is important for them. So like imagine that there's like a Protocol Guild, there's like a dev tools guild, there's like some other guild and whatnot. I think from like a donor's perspective, they'd rather be able to like pick and choose rather than saying like I'm sending all this money into a pot and I'm not actually sure what's in the pot. So I think it's very healthy if there's like imagine there was like a Gitcoin guild and people want to reward the work that like the Gitcoin like contributors do to like actually build all this public goods infrastructure. Then I would suggest making like a narrow Gitcoin guild more than like some public goods guild, because then it becomes like really hard to know where the funds are going. So yeah, I think it totally makes sense to fork it, and I think like just my experience talking with people donating to this stuff, like legibility to them is really important. Yeah.
Yeah, from my perspective, I think, obviously, if projects want to fork the Protocol Guild and kick some funds back to the Protocol Guild for that, then that's great. But, for the same reason that Geth doesn't ask for a fee, neither will the Protocol Guild in that regard.
Yeah.
But I think, the more sort of forks that we have, the more it is like an endorsement of this self-curation mechanism. And we're all for that. We think it's very powerful.
Yeah. It kind of brings to mind for me, like in the old world, we have like, I'm just going to use the United States because that's where I live, but like federal public goods and then statewide public goods and then like local town public goods. And I'm almost seeing like this ecosystem develop in the Web3 ecosystem where we've got like Ethereum public goods, and then we've got like the Protocol Guild contributors, and that's their self curation. And then you've got Moloch DAO as a coordination mechanism, and as a coordination mechanism. And within each of these, there's like RPGF round 1 and RPGF round 2. Same thing with Gitcoin. You've got rounds 1, 2, 3, 4, like up to 15, and then you've got like the climate rounds and the DeSci rounds, and then you've got Giveth, and like it feels like there's like a plurality of coordination like public goods curation mechanisms in the Web3 ecosystem, and Protocol Guild is definitely like the most legit, one of the most legit with respect to how we fund like the Ethereum security protocol public goods. But I'm wondering if there's anything this brings up for you about like the plurality of public goods curation mechanisms in Web3, and just sort of like the wider story of Web3 for public goods, if that brings up anything for either of you.
Yeah, 100%. Like I, the same way I think, you can fork Protocol Guild if you want. I don't think it's like a solution to every problem, right? Like I think, the things where it works for Ethereum is it's like some large set of contributors across many orgs. It's changing over time. So like, there's a bunch of reasons why like we ended up with this because it made sense with us, but like I wouldn't, force feed it to anyone. And the sort of mental model I've been trying to think about is like, DeFi Legos, right? When people sort of like plug in all these DeFi primitives together and have them interact, I think we're starting to see a bit of that with like the public good space, and that's very cool. Like the fact that, literally Protocol Guild is like one of the larger recipients of like Optimism RPGF rounds. To me, that shows us like the API working, right? Like these two things can like interop, smoothly. So I agree. You want different mechanisms to address different biases and different like focuses. And for example, one of the reasons why Protocol Guild is focused on people and not companies is just that there are a ton of mechanisms that focus on companies today. Like I work at the EF, I give out grants to client teams, and it's just like, it's a thing that's already like done and exists. And so it's not that like it's bad to give money to companies, but we saw like that spot of like the, I don't know, like incentive space was just like empty. And so it made sense to create something with Protocol Guild to fill it. But for sure, there's many niches that are empty, and filling those and making sure it sort of interrupts together. I think that's super important.
I mean, for me, it brings up, we have like a market for public goods. And then like, I'm imagining that I want to launch a DAO one day, and like, I'm like, oh, the constituencies I need to reach are like the Gitcoin round 15 climate contributors and the RPGF round 2 tooling and infrastructure contributors and the Protocol Guild contributors. And like, you can almost like add them to cart, and there's a marketplace for which public goods get funded. And I think like Protocol Guild is obviously a legit one in that marketplace, so it'll get chosen a lot. But to me, I just get really excited about the plurality of like each of those is a curation mechanism for which public goods are good. And I just get excited about that diversity when I think about it.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I think for us to be successful, we need to be complementary, right? We cannot compete with all the others. And so, yeah, to your point, Kevin, we want to live in this pluralistic world where, everyone, the Gitcoins, the Optimisms, CLR funds, everyone is working together to fund public goods in their own effective way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's no one like global value set. There's a diversity of value sets. And so you can choose the public goods that you care about. It's like a multi-vector space, I think is what someone said at the meetup.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything I didn't ask that y'all want to say?
My call to action, we talked about contributing to the Protocol Guild, and there's obviously the financial aspect of that. But there's also the non-financial aspect. And so if you, like me, would just like to volunteer to help the Protocol Guild, right? If you want to contribute in any way that you can with some manpower, then please check out our Discord. We just launched a contribute channel. In there, we have a link to a public task list. And, check that out. If you see something in there that you think you could help with, then, we would be thrilled to have you help with that. So, yeah.
Memes as well,
Yeah.
If you want to make some good Protocol Guild memes, just send them to me. I'll retweet them. Yeah.
There we go. Well, I've got a link to your Discord, to the Protocol Guild Twitter, and then I'll have y'all's Twitters in the show notes. So if you're listening, thanks for listening. Click the links in the show notes to get more involved with Protocol Guild. All right. Any final words, gents?
No, thank you so much for having us. This was a fun conversation.
Yeah. Congrats on all the traction. Really excited to have you, and keep up the good work.
Thanks.
I've been a listener since episode 1 of the Green Pill, Kevin. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. It's an honor. Thank you.
Nice. Get this guy a POAP. Active listener. Sweet. Well, we will keep green pilling the world, and there's a loop between talking about this stuff and actually doing this stuff, and then learning and iterating. And so we'll just keep spinning that flywheel until we're exporting public goods to the world. So that's the goal.
Sounds great.
Perfect.
All right. Peace and love.